So,
good. Okay, so I think we should start, no? Because it's already 2 and we have the audience and so.
Yes. Anyways, welcome back to the last and final episode of this series of webinars on climate change disinformation. Previous webinars were conducted to set the stage and to draw perspectives on combating false information proliferation within the broader context of climate change, reflect on the need to communicate research-based and factual science to the public from the demand side, and evaluate how false information stems from the supply side. We've been delighted to have panelists to the scientific, cultural, civil society, and many other sectors today. We'll also count on representatives of the public, politics, intergovernmental, as well as cultural sectors, whom are all relevant components of the convergence that we are looking forward for. This webinar will present a convergence and try to address how can we look beyond confusion and inspire action. I reiterate again that this activity is in line with the communication and information sector's mandate to promote universal access to information, also the natural sciences sector's mandate to create knowledge and understanding to achieve sustainable development and greener societies. Before we begin individual interventions, I would like to invite our audience members to post any questions that you may have in Q&A as the discussion goes on. Our team will be monitoring the Q&A, and at the end of the panel discussion, there will be a Q&A session where you will, we will try to bring up all these questions. So but without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Moez Chakchouk, ADG CI sector, to say a few words to welcome participants, and also to invite Minister Sergio Costa, Minister for Environment of Italy. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Banu. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you to the last and final episode of this series of webinars on climate change disinformation. Previous webinars were conducted to set the stage and to draw perspectives on addressing false information proliferation within the broader context of climate change. To reflect on the need to communicate research-based and factual science to the public, and to evaluate how false information stems from the supply side. We have been delighted to have panelists of the scientific and cultural spheres, from civil society and many other sectors. Today, we will also count on representatives of the public, politics, intergovernmental and cultural sectors, whom are all key actors in taking our action forward. This final webinar will present a convergence and try to address how we can look beyond confusion and inspire action. How we can continue promoting universal access to information and work together to create knowledge and understanding to achieve sustainable development and greener societies. In this final webinar, we bring all our insights together to try and outline some concrete actions going forward. We will begin with the keynote from Mr. Sergio Costa, Minister of the Environment and the Protection of the Territory and of the Sea of Italy, who was honored us with a video message, as he is unable to join us live, followed by panel discussions. After this panel discussion, the Citizens Platform on Climate Change and Sustainable World will be launched. I wish you fruitful webinar, and thank you for your attention. And I want to highlight here that our DG is actually in Italy. So maybe this is the reason why our dear minister cannot join us. So the floor is yours, Jaco and Banu, to moderate the session. I'm here to follow.
Thank you very much, Assistant Director General for Communication and Information of UNESCO's sector on communication and information. It is now a pleasure to listen to the Honorable Minister's input on this very important topic of disinformation or false information and climate change. We will now listen to his intervention.
Disinformazione, fake news e clima. Ringrazio l'UNESCO per aver organizzato questo webinar perché ci consente di fare una riflessione su un tema particolarmente sentito. Sentito perché noi stiamo parlando di mutamenti climatici, di aggressione al nostro pianeta, di costruzione di un futuro e di una nuova normalità di cui sentiamo ancora di più oggi l'esigenza dopo la vicenda Covid, ma la dobbiamo costruire insieme su solide basi scientifiche e su una informazione che si trasformi da informazione anche in formazione. Che cosa intendo dire? Che alla luce delle vicende che stanno attraversando il pianeta, alla tragedia sanitaria che sta attraversando il pianeta e tutte le nostre famiglie, è il momento veramente fino in fondo di ripensare al concetto di nuova normalità. Cioè, vogliamo ritornare tutti quanti al pre-Covid o vogliamo costruire una normalità diversa? Per costruire una normalità diversa appoggiamoci finalmente su quella che è una solida formazione e informazione scientifica. Chi ce lo ricorda tutto questo? Ce lo ricordano i giovani del pianeta, non i giovani di una nazione, i giovani che sono scesi precedentemente in cosiddetti tempi non sospetti nelle nostre vie, nelle nostre piazze, per dirci: ancorate le vostre scelte politiche e la visione del futuro sulle basi scientifiche che gli scienziati ci propongono, e siate attenti a costruire il pianeta del domani, perché il pianeta di domani sarà abitato da noi giovani di oggi. Questo è, secondo me, non solo un senso di responsabilità che dobbiamo avere tutti, ma è un senso di partecipazione di cui dobbiamo godere tutti. E in questo senso, quindi, parlare di formazione e di informazione, secondo me è importante. È importante perché a questo punto dobbiamo fare un grande patto, una sorta di patto della comunicazione ambientale, dove la scienza, la politica, il mondo di chi la narra e chi la propone, cioè il mondo del giornalismo, sia un mondo che si parli e si integri. Noi per questo motivo, per esempio, come Paese Italia abbiamo voluto costruire un nuovo tipo di festival, cioè il Festival internazionale del giornalismo ambientale. È chiaro che il festival in questo senso non ha un senso festaiolo, ma ha un senso invece di confronto, di dialettica tra i vari mondi che compongono il giornalismo, cioè la informazione ma che diventa formazione, le varie tipologie di testate, il vario mondo dell'editoria e anche il vario mondo della medesima informazione e formazione, cioè quello della carta stampata, quella della radio, quella della TV, quella che passa sul web. Ormai l'offerta informativa e formativa è tantissima e i narratori dell'ambiente sono tanti. Costruiamo un patto con loro. Noi abbiamo lanciato questo patto proprio per dire: ancoriamo il nostro percorso a qualcosa di estremamente solido che ci consenta a noi politici di oggi di costruire un futuro per le classi dei giovani che oggi ci chiedono di essere al centro dell'azione di governo, ma anche di costruire una normalità verde, una normalità diversa su piani diversi rispetto a quella che abbiamo vissuto noi. E per questo io ringrazio l'UNESCO, perché l'UNESCO oggi ci consente di fare questa riflessione. Di nuovo grazie.
We thank the Minister for his inspiring words, I think, not only by reminding us of our responsibility of taking care of the planet, but also thinking forward in terms of our young people, and also the call to form a new pact of and work in terms of multilateralism. And it is on these elements of looking forward and examples of very practical things like the festival that the minister mentioned, that we want to know what are the things that we can take forward so that we have action when we talk about false information and climate change. There has been a lot of initiatives to combat false information. We've heard this throughout our webinars. But which of these are the most promising? How can we put these together to form a pact, as the minister said? And how can we engage in macro or global strategies for action to be taken? So I hope that our audience members, I see we have currently about 39 of them, would make use of the question and answer function that we have through our platform. And we look forward to engage with you on the way forward. Our first speaker is somebody that will come back to us that has already engaged with us in one of the webinars, Dr. Martina Kimes, that will talk to us a little bit about this important responsibility that we have, specifically about water and peace. That is an important element that where we find this phenomena of disinformation, and there are much more need in order to address disinformation through international cooperation, especially as water don't know any boundaries. And I would ask Martina to focus on what levels of actions are possible at the regional level to combat false information about climate change, especially in regions that are suffering from conflict. She gave us very concrete examples last time. If we need initiatives to action, what should we do? Martina, you have 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jaco, and thank you very much, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and to talk about this very important topic. And to start with, I think I will bring lessons that we learned from disinformation on water cooperation processes. What can we learn in this wider debate on disinformation and climate change? And one of the issues is that we need to narrow the space in which disinformation campaigns thrive. Disinformation on climate change and water issue, they thrive because there is very little knowledge. There is a lot of uncertainty. There is a lot of conflicting information. We don't know how the future will look. And that creates a lot of space for those who would like to abuse the situation, exploit it, and start different disinformation campaigns that are often used for political gains. And so for that, we need to, the first step that is important, and this is where international organizations and organizations like UNESCO can play a very important role, is to support governments in these regions affected by water scarcity, as well as political violence and armed conflicts, to help them how they can communicate about these very complex challenges, both with their citizens, but also internationally. We know that, for example, in Europe, the governments receive a lot of support on disinformation around election, but we still have to, we would like to see more support for governments affected by, for example, water scarcity and other issues when they have to deal with many other challenges. So to get some very targeted help on this. And the other issue is what could help is to link the climate change challenges and the risk created by climate change to other issues, to bring it a little bit closer to the people so they can understand that climate change, it also means food insecurity. It also means it can affect employment. It is also about the job security. It is about gender issues. It is about many, many other issues than the core, very, very scientific issues related to climate change itself. So it would be very beneficial to increase the general understanding how climate change affects different groups of people. And there we can really also work with different actors and different communicators. So key is really to be supporting the governments. We can also work with different NGOs, we can work with different international organizations, and really helping them with the communication campaigns. Often we see that these two, we also have to think what is the target audience, because those who spread the disinformation and those who are very very good with the information influence campaigns. They are very professional. It is not just somebody sharing one article on Twitter. There's a lot of research that goes to it. They really do know their market. They have very powerful supporters who can give them a lot of technical assistance. So we are really combating a very difficult counterpart. So for that is really to think how different segments of our society can be engaged. We should also work more with the technical companies. We, for example, know that WhatsApp decided to limit how many messages how many people can be in a group when we send these group messages. So every region has a different social media device or a different platform which is used to share information. So really to go deeper a little bit and work with these technical tech companies and helping them, working with them, how can we be really more effective in different parts of the world, and really linking it to the public and linking it to other issues. We often see that, of course, now when you, for example, think about the negotiations on GERD in the Nile region, of course, there is a lot of uncertainty. Very few people probably know what's really happening in the negotiation. And so there is a lot of speculation. And that, again, creates a very big space for spreading of disinformation campaigns. So for that, we can also help the governments to understand the benefits of being more open in sharing information and giving them the right platform, and also helping them to find their own way and really thinking what's the most effective way how to communicate with the public. And I'm not sure if I used all 8 minutes, but maybe I will end here, and I'm happy to answer other questions. If you have any follow-up question, please let me know.
Thank you very much, Martina, for reminding us about the importance of linking also climate change to other of the urgent needs that we have on the planet, and also to talk about the importance of access to information and how can we do that. Is the things that we want to know. You talked about the importance of audiences to be targeted specifically. We will now turn to Shahidul Alam. He's a photographer, a writer, a curator, and an activist of rights for over 30 years. And I want to ask him that if we need to initiate actions to inspire confidence, what should we do? Martina gave us already some ideas, and I invite also all of the public to post some ideas and questions for Martina. But with your experience in Bangladesh, what do you think we can do? You have 8 minutes.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Yes.
Yes, I have unmuted myself. I think it's significant that the People's Platform is initiating this discussion. I mean, climate change is perhaps, along with global warfare and global injustice, the biggest ongoing issue we should be dealing with. High quality, reliable, and lucid information is the oxygen that is needed in this suffocating environment. Corona is what concerns us now, but we hope this virus will be a temporary glitch. Climate change, on the other hand, is not something that will go away soon. I'm a photographer, but since I can't show climate change like I can show the weather, the conventional way of showing people the effect of climate change will not work. One has to rely on trust, the reliability of the source, the veracity of the evidence. To combat false information, it is not sufficient to question the data provided. We need to provide alternatives, and in particular, to provide solutions, to provide hope. The narrative needs to be shaped. That takes us to media professionals and to storytellers. And that's really where the organizations I work with, like DRIC and Majority World and Pathshala, come in. We need the storytellers, and we need to network, create synergies rather than competitive environments. And that's also where the citizen platform comes in, not on its own, but as a platform and a catalyst for a synchronized movement that has the power of the people on its side. Martina mentioned the role of governments. Of course, they're important. They have a role. But in many situations, the governments themselves are the source of misinformation, particularly as in my case, when they try and suppress resistance to their mega fossil fuel projects and things like that, when they are a far bigger entity and activists who are trying to correct the misinformation then get at the receiving end of their aggression. But in trying to get this message across, how do we do it? I mean, let's look back at history. Who are the people we believe and trust? The words we believe the most came from the lips of Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, and Mohammed. They spoke at a time when we had no internet. I mean, now I'm doing a video conference with you guys. There was no fax, no television, radio, even print. Yet, thousands of years since they spoke, there are not only people who still believe them and follow their directives, but are prepared to give their lives, and sadly sometimes take lives, based on their reading of the instructions the prophets had given. So let's look at it. I mean, what were their motives? They were not after power or profit. They wanted to provide enlightenment. Why were they so incredibly successful? How did they garner so much support? Some of them are practical professional things. I mean, they had brilliant delivery skills. They had great content. They were timely, and they were credible. They connected the dots and rendered complex stories in terms people can relate to. All of these criteria apply as much today as it did then, but I think it is the final criterion that journalists live by. It is this credibility which we find now lacking. They led lives which were consistent with their teaching. That is one of the reasons why Greta Thunberg has been so successful. She convinced her parents to adopt a lifestyle that has lower carbon footprint. I mean, I'm happy now that we're having this virtual conference and we're not flying in, creating all this carbon dioxide, but she walked the walk. Do we always do that? And if we come to the role of art and documentary work, then the organizations I primarily work with, Greek and majority world, and there is a school called Patshala. I also work in the field of culture, running a festival called Shobimala. There are people who we work within communities. Our space is about local practitioners. The people we work with know the language, the culture, they're aware of indigenous knowledge. They also have the trust of the community. Messages from them will resonate far more with locals than some fancy pamphlet with slick graphics in some foreign language. There is nothing people believe more than word of mouth. Would you believe a flashy PowerPoint by some foreign scientist? Or would you rather believe a trusted friend, the local journalist, the person you grew up with, the person who says, I can vouch for this? For our message to succeed, we don't merely need to get data. We need to get the dopamine, the oxytocin, the endorphins to be secreted within us, to get us energized, enthused, so we buy into what's being said. We need to get people motivated and inspired. That's when you need the African griot under the baobab tree, the Asian journalist under the banyan tree, the indigenous storyteller from the Amazon who can weave in the myths and connect with the present. There are powerful interests at play, and people like me who've been critical of the establishment when others have remained silent have had to pay the price. But we continue to speak, and we continue to mobilize, to nurture new talent, and to provide support to others who are vulnerable. The first sign that a democracy is failing is that the press is no longer free. We live and work often in repressive spaces. We've made a conscious choice to live here as be a part of this community. We breathe the same air. We're here not to plunder and extract and move away. We're here to stay. And we will continue to fight and to resist. It is also important that when the regime does not come after us, we fight as a community. When the regime does come after us, we fight as a community. When I got arrested, while there was this incredible support across the globe by ordinary people, by global celebrities, by Nobel laureates, it was the resistance on the streets of ordinary Bangladeshis that was the most significant. They were the ones who took the biggest risks. It was they who got me free. It is this same committed journalists, artists, activists we're gathering now who will resist from the ground up. We can't do it on our own. None of us can. And I think it is that call for solidarity which is the Citizens Platform. It is the power of art that we want to harness. The big companies have money and muscle, yet we are nimble and agile and have the goodwill of millions on our side. And we're doing it for our children's children. And I think that is why this platform is so important. I'm very happy that UNESCO has teamed up with us, but at the end of the day, it's not about just Citizens Platform for UNESCO, it is for all of us, because it's the only planet that we have, and we better hang on to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alam, for your insight and also reminding us on the important role of different stakeholders, of telling the stories of those that walk the talk, and to make sure that there's synergized action from different fields. And in that spirit, I think the UN is also doing a lot in terms of synergizing efforts at the national level. And I would now want to give the floor to Mr. James Murombedzi, who's the coordinator of the UN Economic Commission for Africa and its Climate Policy Center. And he will give us 8 minutes of reflection on some of the future actions that can be carried out. Mr. Murombedzi, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And thank you also for putting together this series of webinars. Unfortunately, I'm speaking from a place where the network is not particularly good. So if you will permit me, I'll keep the video off. So from an African perspective, let me start off by pointing out that the biggest challenge that we face is in fact actually the lack of adequate weather and climate information. And we also do recognize that globally, there are many initiatives that seek to obfuscate the relationship between the carbon-intensive human activities and climate change. However, for our continent, which is the hardest hit by climate change and which also has the least adaptive capacity, the most urgent imperative is for us to actually understand how climate change and climate variability are affecting ecosystems, economies, and livelihoods in order to develop appropriate response strategies to build the resilience of societies, of economies, and of course, of ecosystems. Now, in Africa, there are several initiatives that seek to actually respond to this question of the lack of climate information and services, recognizing that without adequate information, there is also very limited capacity to take up the little information that is available and to use it in decision making. And so we actually seek to improve the generation and use of climate information through several initiatives. And many of these initiatives seek to support uptake and use of climate information through, for instance, increasing investment in weather and climate observation infrastructure. The whole of the African continent really has got very limited infrastructure to observe the weather and to also make long-term climate calculations. But secondly, because of this limited infrastructure, it also means that we have got very little historical data on which we can actually understand how the climate has been changing. And a lot of the data that is available is in fact not digitalized. And so it is very challenging to analyze that information. And then of course, the capacity to analyze weather and climate information is very limited and mostly limited to national meteorological and hydrological agencies. outside of those agencies, for the people who need to use that information in order to make decisions, there's very little capacity to analyze the information. So for instance, urban planners, energy planners, water planners, farmers themselves, they've got very limited capacity to analyze the information that is delivered to them. And in any case, most of this information is delivered in ways that are not appropriate for the different user audiences. So the capacity to communicate available climate information is limited and needs to be developed. And because of all of these reasons, the uptake and use of climate information in any sphere of decision-making on the continent is generally very limited. So this has been recognized at many different levels. So for instance, at the level of our global understanding of the climate system, the most authoritative process is the process of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this panel actually uses research that is undertaken by individual scientists or scientists working in different institutions, published research. When you analyze the amount of research from Africa, which actually goes into the Intergovernmental Panel's analysis and assessment reports, less than 4% of the scientists that are actually quoted or reported in those assessments are from the African continent. So at the global level, our understanding of what is actually happening in the climate system does not actually reflect any significant African perspectives or African narratives. So we seek to respond to the absence of an African presence in constructing the global climate change narrative. But secondly, also at the regional and national levels, we have the same problem repeating. So there are several initiatives that are already happening which seek to resolve, or at least to begin to resolve some of these challenges. At the African Climate Policy Center at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, we are implementing an initiative that we are working on jointly with the Africa Union Commission, as well as the African Development Bank and other Pan-African institutions, particularly Pan-African civil society, represented by the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, PACJA. This initiative, the one initiative is called the Weather and Climate Information Services Initiative, or WISER in short, which actually has four main objectives. It is working to support, to modernize national meteorological services and strengthen their capacity to deliver climate services. Secondly, that initiative is also seeking to strengthen Africa regional climate centers. These climate centers actually produce regional climate strategies at the different sub-regions of the continent. And thirdly, we are supporting the improvement of the generation and use of climate services. And finally, we are also seeking to build collaboration between global processes and providers, regional and national service providers. So that's the first initiative. Our second initiative is actually a research initiative, which is called the Climate Research for Development Initiative. And this is designed to strengthen links between climate science research and the climate information needs to support development planning in Africa. So the initiative carries out research, for instance, to look at what exactly are the different stakeholders, the users of climate information, and how do they want climate information to be packaged and delivered in order for it to be useful for them. But research is also looking, for instance, at what are the economic impacts of climate change on different activities, and how can those be mitigated, and how can resilience be built in planning and so on. So a whole lot of research initiatives are being undertaken there in order to ensure that we have sufficient information on climate change processes and dynamics in all different sectors of economic and social life on the continent. And finally, we have an initiative that is also a continental initiative being implemented by continental bodies, the Africa Union, Africa Development Bank, and the United Nations Economic Commission, which is called the Climate for Development in Africa. Now, this is a very interesting initiative because it recognizes that while climate change actually does impose some massive costs on the African continent, it also does create opportunities which, if properly harnessed, can enable the continent to embark on development trajectories which will help the continent to avoid carbon intensive processes, but also which will help the continent to generate employment, to generate livelihoods and so on in green initiatives, such as green energy, such as climate resilient agriculture and so on. So this particular initiative also supports the development of observation infrastructure in order to generate sufficient information to help the continent to embark on these kinds of development strategies. And that investment is actually done through the Africa Development Bank, which has created a climate change special fund, which is working with national Met services to ensure that they have the physical infrastructure to understand what is happening and to generate the climate information that is required. So these are the three sort of flagship initiatives that we're implementing with other partners on the continent. And of course, there are other initiatives that are being implemented at other scales, but I wanted to emphasize these because in fact, they do subsume several national and sub-regional initiatives. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for those suggestions. I think also talking about the importance of creating a narrative for Africa. Africa is also a priority for UNESCO, and the UN has a very important role to play here. The research initiatives that you mentioned, I think, are important elements also to make sure that research is carrying out, and also highlighting the importance of data that should not be left out. We will now move to Mr. Federico Cinquepalmi. The government of Italy has been a very big force behind UNESCO's action on climate change and water. So we also would like to hear from you a little bit. What are the elements that can be taken forward at the national level? The minister already mentioned one of the festivals that can be put on the table. Are there any other initiatives that you think are important that we could also work on? The floor is yours. Is Mr. Federico Cinquepalmi with us?
He should be. He was there, no? Yes. Federico Cinquepalmi?
Yes, I can see him online. Maybe he's still muted. Technology plays strange things with us here on a Monday, so I think it's it is normal that that some technological issues come up. Mr. Cinquepalmi? Okay, I'm sure the technology would forgive us, and we'll try to.
Federico? No, ma devi schiacciare il.
Maybe while we look at some solutions for him to come to us, I think we could so long just look at some of the questions that have been asked in the chat function. And I think Martina already talked about some very concrete things that can be done. Martina, do you want to summarize maybe just your answer on the question related to some of the initiatives?
Yeah, I responded on the chat. And I just would like to say, I do understand that there is a concern that governments do use fake news and misinformation, and it is true, they do also use it to influence processes in different regions. But we do have to remember that the governments, that they are accountable to the people. And if we think on the global scale, we also do see many countries where the governments have been greatly affected by, for example, brain drain, when they really do, and when they yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I just finished this sentence.
Sorry,
so when
Martina, I didn't want to interrupt you, sorry.
No worries. So when they receive assistance, these governments in countries affected by conflicts and in maybe a post-conflict situation, the support from donor community, it's usually on heavy infrastructure. It's more on the traditional projects. And there is a very few targeted support to work with these governments on these communication campaigns and also understand them how much they are hurting themselves should they use fake news. So it's a really this sustained capacity building support and strengthening support in a local context. That's very important. I'm not talking about importing some special PR wizards from Europe and implanting them somewhere in a region which they don't know. I'm really talking about somebody who would continuously work with these governments and helping them to find local solutions, because there is a fairly little attention given to this. And then the governments, then it's very easy for them to being exploited by different other groups and different sites. So I think that this should not be underestimated, and these programs should also find their priority in different donor support.
Thank you so much.
Since you are back, Federico is back, so please.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Martina, for summarizing also the elements that you've answered already. We will now give the floor to Mr. Federico Cinquepalmi, who is the Director of the Office of Internationalization of Higher Education of the Italian Ministry of Universities and Research. And we will give him 8 minutes to give us a little bit his reflection for the action forward. And you might also want to consider one of the questions that have been asked in the chat, talking specifically about the role of education, and especially traditional education, to change mindsets so that we could fight climate change. And how could educational institutions also play an active role? So over to you, Mr. Cinquepalmi.
Thank you, and sorry for the misunderstanding on the microphone. Unfortunately, the new plan that I have in my office, it's very complicated. The fact is that on my observation point as director of the internationalization at the Ministry of University and Research in one side, and on the other side being myself a scientist and an academic, is forcing me to few, let's say, preliminary reflections that I want to share with you. First of all, I would like to give you a few keywords that probably will be helpful in order to understand the sense of my reflection. Ethics, credibility, the role of scientists in society, the role of teachers and professors in society, mutual respect, and deontology. Well, I must say that since, let's say 20 years, I do have observed that all those worlds are more or less getting in a kind of neglected interest on society in general terms. I'm not a sociologist, so that I don't want to take a floor that is not mine. However, it's important to say that last 20 years, in one side, seeing the advancement of the spreading of information through the internet system, and on the other side, the different role that scientists and academics have played toward governments, make a substantial changement in the landscape of information in the world, especially in scientific information. What since 20-25 years was true because it was generally considered true because it was supported by sure data and all the scientific community was ready to follow it, now is questionable for some reason. For any scientist that says something, you can be absolutely sure that you can find another scientist that says exactly the opposite. And this is making, of course, problematic relations between the academic and the scientific community, society, and governments. So being, as I said, a scientist and an academic in loan to a ministry, I have been quite often in the difficult position to prepare the political position of a minister in a scientific domain. So maybe this is something that I will have to say, but it's not difficult. It has never been difficult in the history of mankind saying no to a politician. Politician have his own perspective, his own view of the world, his own view of the society. And matching with that view is sometimes could be difficult for several reasons. However, I think that the role of scientists and academics is sometimes to say no, or at least advise in the appropriate way the politicians that they are the persons that dealing with decision at national and international level in order to help them in the better way, let's say, in the interest of society. That is the ultimate goal of political arena, I assume. Well, this kind of, I don't want to say the word disgregation, but maybe it's something like that. So it's this kind of difficulties on mutual understanding between science and political decisions. It's one of the terms of problem, probably. The other term, as I said in the beginning, is the misinformation, or better, the excess of diffusion of information through the net, to the internet. So anyone is today convinced that could form his own opinion just because they go on Google or on Wikipedia and they found something that is matching with their own idea. Well, it's difficult, and it's especially difficult being a teacher and a professor, me too, explaining to a young person that is in your trust, in your classroom, what is the difference between having a very shallow knowledge of something or having dedicated all your life to study something, and having the critical capacity to understand a complex problem on the basis of your scientific background. It's not an easy task, and I'm dealing with that every day. It's part of the problem too. So if I will have to say, I don't have properly an answer to all those problems, except the fact that maybe pushing as much as possible, especially in primary and secondary education, on the points of ethic, credibility, mutual respect, and the concept of deontology, even in mutual relation between child and the classroom. It's something that is at the basis of the future of a democratic way to conceive the living on the world, the respect that is coming from the opinion of the others, but relying on evidence and data. If evidence and data are not respected, opinions could be disrupting for society. It's not enough to say, I do think something that makes that thinking true, especially on complex issues like climate change. Well,
thank you.
That's it. I think is more than enough.
Thank you so much also for, I think, highlighting also the importance of lifelong learning, I think, in terms of elements related to the questions that we are dealing with, not only related to climate change, but also some of the skills that are necessary to deal with information. We will now turn to some of the questions that have been asked to the different panelists. I see many of them have been answered also in the chats, but I think it's important just to summarize some of those elements. We I would also like to just remind everybody that there were two other speakers that were supposed to join us, but because of last-minute changes, were not able to join us in terms of this webinar, and one is Valérie Masson-Delmotte, who's the co-chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. She was supposed to be with us, but unfortunately she couldn't make it. And the other person that was already mentioned here is also the senator from Argentina, that Mr. Jorge Tayana, that could unfortunately not be with us because he has also been called away for an urgent meeting. But I do think that if we look at the questions, let's hear a little bit what our experts have to say. And thank you so much for those that already answered some of the questions. There's one question here on the importance of structured online libraries for people to understand climate change. And I think this is an interrogation in terms of platforms and repositories that are being put forward. What role can they play? And I'm sure that we'll be able to have the example just after this question and answer series. And it would be interesting to see what specific role you see for these online libraries. There's also a specific question for Mr. Alam in relation to disclosing information in small communities and towns, and how do you deal with that while communities do need to be engaged, but there's definitely also a factor where people's lives can be in danger, and what can be done in terms of that. So maybe you could give us some hints on how to deal with information without necessarily disclosing the source. I think there was also a question related to the importance of small SIDS countries, small island development states. And I think that has been answered already, but maybe we could just highlight the importance of targeting not only Africa, but also other small island states. So I would give in those questions, or some of the questions that I maybe missed, for our speakers each, maybe just 2 minutes to try and reflect on the questions, but also on the interventions of others. And I'll start with Mr. Alam, as he has a specific question, and he's first on the left-hand side of my screen. So 2 minutes for you, just for some of the responses. Thank you.
Okay, there were two questions. I was actually just typing that there. The word of mouth was actually a metaphor. It was a metaphor for someone you trust, for someone who's close to you, someone who's committed to the community. And provided we can empower people who are close to the community, who have the community's trust, to have a voice, we can actually create those linkages. Of course, the misinformation has to be questioned, but a lot of the misinformation actually comes from corporations who have business interests, often governments in cahoots with major corporations, as in my country. I mean, there are major plants. There is the Rampal project, which is near the Sundarbans, which is threatened to destroy the largest mangrove forest in the world. There's a nuclear power plant in Rupur. And there are these coal power projects which have been encouraged by the government because there's money to be made, and it involves nexus where international companies and sometimes international governments are in cahoots, and the government is very repressive in these situations. So what we need to find are ways in which people who are trusted by the community are sheltered, are protected, are nurtured, are given a voice, so the sound, the voices of the community can come out, because that is the only way through which
La bibliografia della mia monografia c'era una cosa fatta dal governo britannico sul...
Okay, is that a call for coffee?
Please go ahead, Mr. Alam. Just 1 minute left.
Okay. One of the things that has happened is there really is a very strong resistance to many of these fossil fuel power projects that are being run in Bangladesh right now. Yet, you have the interests of the corporate sector, you have experts brought in, and the government, of course, has mainstream television, they have the government radio, the government television is entirely in their control. And particularly today, when we have laws which make it illegal for people to critique the government in question and criticize people in the establishment, it becomes very, very difficult. I mean, I got arrested because I was questioning some of these things. And luckily for me, there was this massive public support which led to my release, but not everyone gets that. And I think there are very important people out there in the grassroots doing good work, and their voices need to be amplified.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alam. You might want to also look at some of the other questions that are directly directed to you in the chat. It seems that you are very popular in providing some responses. I will now turn to Martina, if she can give us also some of the reflection of the other interventions and also some of the questions. I don't know if the question of SIDS, it touches also upon what you said earlier about cross-regional cooperation, I think is one of the modalities that one could look at. But please give us just 2 minutes, some of your reflections on what has been said and asked so far.
I would like to answer the questions that refer to farmers and fishermen, and how do we get the information to these communities, because we know that these communities often, when they lose their livelihoods because of either climate change processes or other, then they are very often targeted by different recruiters from terror networks in certain parts of the world. And what I can say that sometimes, for example, on early warning systems on droughts, we already have the information, but that we have at this special center in Nebraska, and it's difficult to get this information in the right time to this farmer that can really then make necessary changes and prepare for the drought. So it's also how we already have the knowledge and we have this technology, but how do we get it to these communities? So I would really urge everybody who works with different technological tech companies to really think, how can you use the devices or the opportunities that we have? How can we use it to these types of communities? How can we reach it? How can we make it more accessible? How can we make it easier for the right fact-based information to be shared? Because in some sense, we already have all the knowledge, but it's not equally distributed. And now I'm really talking about our knowledge about the climate change and climate variability and these processes. So I think that there is a lot of improvement that can be done. But I think that with support of organizations like UNESCO, who has access to this data, and who can possibly collaborate with different partners, and then we can really see how can we support these communities. And this will, with the increasing impacts of climate change, we will see this more and more, how different rural communities in different parts of the world will be affected. And I can see this also as a security issues, because once these lose their livelihoods, they will really become an easy target, as I said, to different recruiters who will offer a different type of employment. So,
Thank
I think that's something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martina, also for asking the latter part of the question on SIDS and targeting also very specific audiences and the importance of getting data in the right packaged to them. I will now maybe move to Mr. Murombedzi. I don't know if you want to say also a few words about the online library and what role that can play, or some other initiatives that you might want to put forward in the questions. Thank you. 2 minutes for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Regarding the availability of information online, the ECA, the Economic Commission for Africa, has been exploring different ways of communicating information. And one of the most promising was, in fact, working with community radio, helping them to actually interpret information and make it available via radio to a wide range of constituencies, including farmers and fishermen. But in that regard, one of the most important insights that we have developed is that much of the information is actually produced in ways that are inherently inaccessible to most constituencies, except to the climate scientists themselves. And so what we are trying to develop are ways of co-producing and co-analyzing climate information with different stakeholders. So before you make an observation, let's say in a river basin, you put together, you consult all of the different stakeholders and you ask them, and together you develop the methods and ways of producing information that would be relevant to them. My last point is that this is particularly important because, in fact, most stakeholders also already have their own climate knowledge and climate information. It may not be produced in the same ways as the information that we use, that we get through normal observation. But remember, farmers, for instance, are observing their climate over centuries, passing on that information. And the same thing happens to fishermen and so on. So when you interact and when you co-produce, you are also incorporating their information into your analysis based on the observations that you are making. And I think this is the most promising way forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Murombedzi, for the insight also there of highlighting the importance of citizen sciences and the role that they can actually play, that citizen science can actually play in finding solutions. I will now give the floor to Mr. Cinquepalmi, that might want to talk to us a little bit about citizen science within some of the educational environments here in Europe, or the importance, I think, also of online library environments in order to disseminate repackaged information. The floor is open to you.
Well, the matter of online information is a very serious matter in effect, because online you can really find out almost everything. And so once again, I want to repeat the mantra that education is the key. In the new digital era, when we all are moving right now, educating children and young people to understand the source of information that are reliable and the other that are not reliable is a very important point to be raised. I have personally finished to publish a book where the matter of climate change is tackled in relation of cities. My field of research is urban environments. And having worked a lot on internet review of information, I find out literally a jungle of information, that from the more crazy to the more reliable one. And personally, I wanted to share with the person that was asking that online, that a brochure produced by the UK government a few years ago related to climate change and the importance to understand what is true and what it is just, let's say, misinformation, was a very good one. So before the end of the conference, I will be able to share the link with you of this very simple booklet that is clear and explaining very well, translating from the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, the most important issue to be shared with people in order to understand what is exactly climate change and what is implied to the life to anyone. I mean, the fact that we are at the moment suffering of the spreading of this COVID-19, it's so much related with the issue of, let's say, global change in general. And it needs to be considered in the same framework. We are all interconnected, so it's all related with our lifestyle and our unsustainable way to conceive the development of the mankind stay on Earth. So it's really something that needs to be addressed on the educational issues since the early childhood in a very attentive way. At the point that talking about initiatives, I can tell you that Italy has been the first country, I think, in Europe to authorize programs on education on climate change and environment at university level in an agreement between the Minister of University and Research and the Conference of Directors, because of course it needs to respect the independence of universities. But the point is really agree on the terms of communicating issues like sustainability and climate change. It is extremely important to find common ground, especially because common people needs to, let's say, interiorize what is implied climate change for them, for their daily life. And that's probably the most difficult things to do on the scientific point of view. It's not just that, it's not banalizing science, it's simplifying science for people.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think also for reminding us on the importance of simplifying the sciences to people, but also, as was said earlier, that people could identify with the issues at stake. I would like to thank our panelists for the great interventions and questions. I think we have different elements on the table that we could take forward in looking specifically at action. And one of the actions I think that's on the table is exactly an initiative of Ricardo Grassi, the president of the IPS Academy and the Director General of the Citizens Platform, to conduct the part of the session that talks about the launch of this citizens platform on climate change and the sustainable world. So over to you, Ricardo, in order to lead us to a very specific example that can be put forward in an online environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you and to the panelists that have been speaking so far. So we are here today in this webinar. It's about convergence. Convergence for action together, which is a central point of the citizens platform that we are launching today. Action together with timely, extremely accurate information, imagination, critical thinking, and art, because art most of the times convey messages and generates mobilization more than millions of words. This is at the core of the independent citizens platform on climate change and a sustainable world. It's implemented by professional journalists and communicators. So it's a digital medium, not collateral to any other activity. It's a medium, then information and communication that, after me, Roberto Razeto will explain in details, conceptually, and the particular elements that are structured in this platform. We are launching it today because the pandemic at the same time generated two different situations. Slowdown and the feeling of speeding up, because we were faced to an unexpected reality that generated even a deeper reflection about our way of living. And so we felt that we had to speed up the launching of the citizens platform, though in the form that we call a choir rehearsal. Today, you and everyone will be able to go into the platform, watch what it is, but choir rehearsal means citizens platform team going towards the community we want to live with, while we continue building and polishing our output. Our motto, as we have coincided with UNESCO on it, is all these webinars is going beyond confusion, inspiring actions. And this is also at the very core of the Citizens Platform. All the outputs that we are producing and the action that we are generating has to do with going beyond the confusion that has been created or is created by disinformation, false news, and non-skilled communication, which is a factor that counts very much. We come from history, and this is something I want to say, because history builds and explains a will, an identity, and also builds trust. This history has some very concrete points. One of them has to do with UNESCO, precisely. When in the 1990s, the Planet Society program was created and launched, and in which I was able to work externally, not as a UNESCO official. And at the time, we were not focusing on climate change. It was focusing broadly on environment. And we were talking of new ways of living on Earth that we don't call today eventually best practices. But we were also identifying worldwide these new ways of living on Earth, as the Citizens Platform is doing, searching information and building the stories of those of thousands and hundreds of thousands already today worldwide and at very local levels, testing other ways of producing, other ways of consuming, and other way of living together. We don't know exactly, there's not a formula yet on how reorganizing our lives. We just have signals, some ideas to debate, many ideas to consider, because this is complex, but that's what we want to do. That's what we want to do, and this has to be done globally, but critically at local levels, because changes happen locally, with local people, communities. That's where things happen. You can touch them, feel them. It's not virtual, let's say. And for that, in our development model, as you say in the jargon, is moving from where we are now, which is in Italy, to regions, from regions to countries, and within the countries to local realities. On this, for instance, in the case of Asia, we are working already together with Shahidul Alam and his fantastic social enterprise called DRIC, and also Majority World, which is a photo agency. So that is fundamental. In this history, there's another element that is called Enterprise Service, which is a news agency already created in 1964, when the inflow of information in the world was basically controlled by 5 news agencies distributed between the United States, UK, France, and Spain. Those were the main ones. IPS came in to change the rules of the game and created a school of thought to which I belong, and that Citizens Platform picks up. This school of thought has to do with how you structure information, who are the main actors, and so on and so on. So it's a long history that counts and that gives substance and solidity to what we are launching today. In this, coming together with UNESCO, of course, is fundamental, because UNESCO, apart from its prestige, is a gigantic concentration of information, data, experts, and a lot of people with goodwill, professionally doing good things. This was just my general introduction. I will probably say something more concluding, because I think that also recognizing as history, also recognizing and gratitude are very important for what we want to do. And I will introduce now to my colleague, partner, friend, Roberto Razeto, with whom we have created together the IPS Academy and conceived together the Citizens Platform on Climate Change and Sustainable Development. Besides this, Roberto is a brilliant young person, multicultural person, that heads the international affairs at the IULM University in Milan. He also heads the consortium, is a consortium manager of the Goethe Hofstede Consortium. He is the head of teaching of the Master of Arts in Communication for International Relations. And since 2011, he is the advisor for the strategic communication and climate change for the World Bank Group. He's also a journalist, and he has specific PhD with a specialization in communication for climate change. So I think that now I give the word to Roberto, that will also present the image of the platform.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Thank you very much, you all. And before I try to explain a little bit something about the platform and how we created the platform, and then I'd be glad to show you the platform for the first time on the web. So I would like to start with a quick consideration, Ricardo, that was already raised during the last Wednesday webinar. It was said by Emmanuel Vincent of Science Feedback, if I remember well, that the digital and platforms within the internet environment elevate and enhance the possibilities that science must be embraced. That is where I would like to start today, as this is happening for several reasons, 3 positive reasons and 3 pitfalls. The first one, because of the immediacy of the message, which potentially can reach all the inhabitants of the earth at the same time. So this is one of the features of the digital environment. And secondly, because of the need for simplification that we need through a vehicular language as English language of the message itself. Third point, for the interactive capacity inherent in the message itself, which can be transformed and adapted to different cultures. Within these 3 reasons are even also much pitfalls. So the first one is the immediacy of the message needs devices that allow the same speed for access. These devices are real prostheses of the body that allow to act with the same speed and promptness of the message itself. Only in that way, it is possible to define an environment of involvement that echoes the message. The second point, the second pitfall, is the simplification of the message, that its dark side is hidden in the message itself. This is one of the reasons why we find ourselves today in an environment called of post-truth, in which misinformation is ennobled in the same way as truth. Why this? because there's many simple but false messages which are equal and contrary to each other, create a contrast within the same scientific news. And this, in turn, generates a discussion and debate that is misleading compared to the news. The third pitfall, the third problem, is the ability of the scientific message to be conveyed at a multicultural level, and therefore its ability to penetrate the popular culture of reference. If we mean local pop culture despite of global pop culture. This is and represents at the same time the value of the message itself. So the multicultural level. And here, Ricardo, I would like to underline a central point for us. The message that must be conveyed cannot be considered vehicular if it does not have the capacity to be transposed. I mean, rearrange or something like that by the various local cultures stratified in the wider human culture. And I'd like to introduce one of the central features of the platform that is not active today, but will be active in a few months. So the multilingualism of the platform. The platform is launched in English, the vehicular one on a global level, but later we will reach the number of 10 languages, moving towards national and even local languages. So to cover the entire range of the most used languages around the world. The reason why this is also something that we come from IPS, Enterprise Service. Multilingualism defines the communication figure of this project is the fact that all the cultural facets that power social transformation are hidden in languages. The different, and this is another central point, that the different connotations of the culture of reference and being able to convey information that has a global aim, a global scope, must necessarily take into account these different facets through an analysis of the meaning of the message and the receptive capacity of a culture with respect to its historical background, as you mentioned before, the importance of history and the historical background for us. Another central issue is the digital aesthetics, of course, of the project today with social media, with a lot of pictures and videos spread around the world through the digital medium and media is very important, the aesthetic of the project. This is a context in which image, colors, and shapes used define the penetrative capacity, equal and superior to that of the narrative message itself. So if we look at Instagram and social media, the image is the inner point of all the social communication of the media, of the medium itself. For a crucial theme such as climate change, the image is central and decisive. Conversely, once you open the page where the content is presented, the aesthetic context defines its emotional impact, allowing a better conveyance of the message and of the information of the article. Today, all this is possible thanks to a higher definition of images and videos. Now I want to introduce the platform and the sections of the platform. The platform is divided into 3 different and distinct sections. One of the stories, the narrative part, which is already online today, where quality information will be reported, certified to create the correct use of climate change related issues and the process of structuring the world according to a vision of sustainability. The second is about the best practices, as you mentioned before, Ricardo, already in use in the world, so that they can be shared, borrowed, and reapplied, if satisfactory, of course, in more places of the planet. This section will follow the first day in the coming months, though some of them are already featured, of course, into the stories section. And the third, concerning new ideas for the future to be shared, grasped, reworked, and generated in public form as policies and regulations or business ideas, as products or services. There is yet a fourth section of the platform that is a way to communicate our point of views and the point of views of all citizens, that the daily use of social media to convey the straightforward messages in line with our editorial policy coming from us or from others in the net, in the internet. Each of these sections will be open to users, the citizens, and is a central word in our binom citizen platform. The citizen who can write articles, share best practices, at the same time generate ideas so they can participate in the platform as a social media, as a social medium, as a central discussion. All this is in an open public space of sharing and collaboration. So that a process of circular communication can be activated and placed at the forefront of the structuring of a true circular economy, a word that we can use a lot during these last seasons of the world history. And okay, now let's go to the final part of this introduction. And I want to use an analogy. We discussed a lot about that I think it is very important to understand why citizen platform and how our project wants to be decisive to curb misinformation about climate change and nurture the development of a culture of sustainability. Communication in the digital environment can be compared to game and gambling, the gamble at the same time. Why? Because gambling, in fact, as a game, has precise rules that must be followed, and as such allow players to interact with each other or alone with the machine. But at the same time, the other side of gambling is the gamble, which in some way is not the game, but is the gamble, is the opposite of the rules that allow gaming itself. If you access too much of the gambling part of communication in the digital environment, especially in the digital environment, then you come up against the confusion and complexity of the human minds that populate the network. Try to consider the trolls and the old that the people spread around the internet. And this generates no longer content that produces information. This is one of the roots of disinformation, misinformation, and post-truth environment. Because this kind of gambling communication produce only pure entertainment that provokes emotions, of which it is difficult to keep control then. But if you stick to the rules of communication, conveying a transparent and clear message that has all the connotations mentioned before, then it is very likely that the game you are playing can end with the satisfaction of all. So another time I wonder why citizens platform? Through what? First, through shared information. Second, with stories, best practices, and ideas. Third, through social communication that supports and feeds the debate. We will try together to nourish the correct information that reaches everyone, the citizens of the planet, because we are all involved. No one is excluded. No one can be left behind. So this is not a simple battle between the humans, but this is an opportunity to grow as humanity, to free ourselves from a past that risks in some ways being our last chapter and the last chapter of our history. And with this statement, I like to introduce Ricardo, if you agree, the citizen platform. So I try to share the screen with you.
because we are arriving to the end of the time allotted.
Can you see now my screen?
Yes, I see that it's
okay.
Partial.
So I try to show you. This is the first release of Citizen Platform that is online today at the address cityplat.org. You can see here an article that is an original article featured by Ricardo Grassi and Mohamed Yunus. And Ricardo, I let you, I pass you the buck, I let you the stage to introduce more about contents and stories and our ideas.
Okay, we unfortunately we already ran out of time, no? So what I do is to invite everyone to go into cityplat.org /test and to navigate through it, where you will find videos and stories, written stories of things that have been produced by us, and many of them together with a group of students, 28 students, which is something that we want to carry on doing because it allows many things. It allows freshness, it allows a different approach, and facilitates local coverage, at least national, but then go local through further partnerships. Because now we have to conclude, and Mr. Moez Chakchouk is going to give some final words, and from our side, just to thank for all that made this possible. I mean, concrete persons like Banu, Neopane, David Estorti, Melissa, Asha, and of course Moez and Jaco in all this endeavor. And to all those that have participated in these 4 webinars, we will be contacting each one, because now we have to build this convergence for action. And in the case of Citizens Platform, it's about coming together and not competing, because there's no need to compete. On the contrary, there's a need of empowering each one and to highlight the good things that each one look and are looking for. So with this, I personally say goodbye and I'll move on. Banu and Jaco, please.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. I think also for this presentation, I think also of the exciting platform that is being developed and now launched. And I'll hand over to the Assistant Director General for the Communication Information Sector at UNESCO, Mr. Moez Chakchouk. Moez, over to you.
Thank you, Jaco. Thank you, Ricardo. I'm very pleased to follow this session, and and also congratulations for what you achieved on this platform. I think it's really promising, and there is a lot of work that needs to maybe to be done, and we are here to engage with you. So for the closing, I will say, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank again our esteemed panelists who have contributed to this series of webinars today and since 15th of June. This 4-part webinar series who have contributed to this 4-part webinar series have brought together great minds and created a space for academics, policymakers, scientists, storytellers, activists, and many other experts to interact with individuals from all walks of society. I'm pleased to bring these online discussions on climate change disinformation to a close. And I would say that thanks to all your efforts, it was possible for us to organize this, even if it is online, because we wanted to have a physical meeting here in headquarters, but we were unable because of the coronavirus. But first, I would like to reflect on what I mentioned at the beginning of the series. Climate change disinformation has led to a polarization amongst society at a time where the world needs unity and mutual support. now more than ever. These webinars have undertaken efforts to bridge that gap between experts and society in order to provide quality tools and analytical skills that equip everyone to navigate their way around the informational sphere. We need to work together and explore the various perspectives that look forward towards addressing false information proliferation within the context of climate change in a sustainable way. The webinars underline the central role of scientific information for policy making and to inform the general public as a whole. Communicating science effectively to different stakeholders is of paramount importance in that view. And storytelling accurate information represents a key method to drive action in our societies. The webinars also highlighted how we can extrapolate quality information and ensure that it reaches the public in a form that is easily understandable and can be reflected upon. Action for free and openly available climate data should be promoted and continue to this end. This is all the more relevant as we have new tools for sharing knowledge, such as those driven by new technologies that can be harnessed. The third webinar explored where the flow of false information stems from. Discussions highlighted the responsibilities of various stakeholders, but also the key role of journalists in providing verified and reliable information, as well the ethics needed to maintain accurate information. Trust and transparency between the public and the government remain equally essential for the dissemination of accurate information and the formulation of policy. The role of education was highlighted, was underlined many times to empower individuals and in particular youth with the necessary media and information literacy skills to navigate the information sphere and analyze information with a critical mindset. Finally, today we had a captivating discussion surrounding the various initiatives that are being undertaken, including the Citizens Platform on climate change and a sustainable world and how we can move forward collectively. I would like to thank each and every participant that has joined our discussions today and in the last weeks. Your thirst for knowledge and passion for learning is what will drive change in this world. Thank you again to all our panelists who took their time to discuss this important topic of climate change information. And of course, thank you to our organizing partner, IPS Academy, Citizens Platform, and particularly to Mr. Ricardo Grassi, who I met just a few weeks after my nomination here in UNESCO 2 years ago. So congratulations for what you achieved after 2 years, let's say, working together with UNESCO. I'm confident that these webinars will pave the way of new synergies and initiatives that contribute to actively addressing climate change disinformation. In the future, we have to give more and more people the voice to come together, deliberate, and learn from such vital issues. Thank you very much. And before closing, I would like to say that this is the first step for a long process that we need to achieve, because it's not easy to tackle this information, and it's not easy to build platforms that are open, that are reliable, that are trustworthy. I think this is all our duties to work together, to join our efforts, and to make this platform a real success. Thank you very much for your engagement with UNESCO. I'm very pleased to join you. And of course, thanks to my colleagues as well, who worked hard to achieve this launch of this platform together with IPS Academy. Congratulations, and thank you and keep the hard working you're doing with us. Thank you.
If I may just briefly, I would like to thank Moez Chakchouk very, very much. I mean, since we met, it took to his intelligence and intuition just 5 minutes to say, I want this, let's move together. And we've been moving together, adding people that has been fundamental to build the movement forward, like Banu and Davide Stotti. So this is extremely important, and now we will continue working together. Sorry, Martina, you were going to say something.
You're welcome.
I just thought that it's time to say goodbye, but this was, of course, much better intervention.
Thank you for everybody. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you. And I hope to see you safe in Paris in UNESCO next time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.